Welcome to the Recess Life Podcast. This is the place where we explore play and what it means to get back to your inner child. I'm Louise, your host. Join me as I chat with teachers, entrepreneurs, artists, and thought leaders about how we can live a life of more play and impact. Let's get it started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Season 4, Episode 3 of the Recess Life Podcast. I'm thrilled to be here with you because last week was quite the ordeal. I'm going to get to that in just a minute. Part of what I'm going to be doing in these introductions now is sharing little snippets of my life and what I'm learning about play that can hopefully apply to your own life. Hopefully you'll find something interesting that resonates with you. I'm going to give you a quick update on what happened to me last week. So midweek, I started experiencing a slight discomfort in my lower abdomen. The next day, the discomfort grew to a more serious pain. I still didn't think much about it because I figured it was cramps of some sort. But then that night, I got super aggressive chills out of nowhere. It was actually when I was working on the podcast when it happened. It was like I was thrown in a freezer all of a sudden. I was shivering like crazy and something just didn't feel right. I went to the doctors the next morning and they sent me immediately to the hospital to get checked out. After a few exams and ultrasounds, I was diagnosed with an appendicitis. I was rushed into surgery that night and stayed overnight. It was quite the whirlwind. After I got the diagnosis, I just thought, what the heck, 2020? What else are you going to throw at me? Thankfully, everything went really well with the surgery. I was in great hands at a wonderful hospital. The crazy thing is that I realized when I was laying in my hospital bed that night, I was actually supposed to be in Uganda right about this time. Before the pandemic hit, I was working on an event with a client that would have had me in Uganda that week. The next morning, I checked my calendar and it turns out that the first day of the event would have been the day before, as in the day I got surgery. Uganda is wonderful, but it's not known for its healthcare. It would have been a much different story if I would have gotten an appendicitis in Uganda. That put a whole different perspective on the situation for me. Like how easily it could have been so much more serious. I feel so much gratitude now that I was where I was and able to get treated with such great care. And it was such a reminder that when our plans change, it might be for the better, and it's not like the plan would have necessarily gone perfectly anyway. So while this year definitely hasn't been ideal, I'm super grateful that the universe was somehow looking out for me. If I would have been resentful or somehow resisted the fact that I had an appendicitis, the more I just would have suffered. I'm not happy about having to recover from an appendicitis, of course. My year was already turned upside down, and I felt like one of the main things that keeps me going each day is my ability to be active and move, whether that be dance, a workout, or this practice called movement culture that I train in. And now I'm going to have to take a break from doing most of that, 6 weeks until I can get back to full capacity. All my main sources of endorphins are being put on pause for a little bit, so I have to get creative, and what better way to do that than through play? I decided I would make it a game to see how many creative ways I could get in and out of bed without exerting my core, without exerting my stomach muscles. I can't sit up and lay down like I typically do because doing that is using your muscles like a sit-up. So I've come up with some really humorous ways to glide in and out of bed on my back and stomach. It's kind of made it actually fun to get in and out of bed. I've cracked myself up a couple times doing it. Something as simple as changing up how you get in and out of bed can be fun and playful. And I also asked friends on social media to send me their favorite feel-good songs so I could make a playlist for myself. I've got some great songs to listen to now where I can have a little dance party in my seat. Not a full-on dance party, but that's okay. I'll still definitely take those moments to slow down and be sad, but I'm also going to keep finding ways to stay playful and engaged. And I also feel like when I find ways to energize through play, I'm able to get healthier and heal even faster. I'm not the only one who thinks something like this. One of my favorite thought leaders and authors is Brené Brown. You've probably heard of her, but if not, she is a shame and vulnerability researcher, and she has influenced me a lot in how I think and live my life. She talks about how wholehearted people live, which are people that are living authentically, something that is super hard to do in our world right now. She has this amazing podcast called Unlocking Us, and last week she came out with a solo episode called RBG, Surge Capacity, and Play as an Energy Source. It is always super validating to have a major thought leader talk about play, so I was very excited to listen to this episode. You should definitely check it out yourself, but I'll just give you a little snippet. She talks about how a lot of us feel at the end of our rope right now with the pandemic and just depleted. When we are in survival mode, like we have been with the pandemic, our adrenaline kicks into gear, but we can only live off adrenaline for so long before we max out. She then goes on to talk about play and how it is its own unique energy source and how incorporating play in her life changed everything for her. Play is not the same energy we get from adrenaline, but more like a steady, predictable source, not so many up and down spikes and volatility like we get off of running off adrenaline. She talked about how she and her family made a playlist together and found the intersection of their different playlists and things they could do together, like swimming and bike rides and pickleball. It's tough though, because we have so much craziness going on in our world right now. It doesn't feel like we have time for play, or it just feels unnecessary. We just had the first presidential debate between our two candidates here in the United States, between Trump and Biden, and let me tell ya, nothing made me want to play less than hearing the shit show that it was. I won't even get into it, but yeah, it was a shit show. There are wildfires still happening. Ruth Bader Ginsburg just passed away. Breonna Taylor's verdict was absolute bullshit. It feels like play should be the last thing on our minds right now, but I love what Brené said in the podcast about this. She said, "We can't fight on no energy. We can't fight for love unless we're experiencing it. We can't fight for joy unless we know joy." I love that so much. There is a lot of fighting and a lot of work to do, but we are no good unless we have the energy to do it. And that's where play and rest comes in. So all that to say is play is so important to give us our energy and to bring us back into healing. So make sure you're finding time to do it. Make your own playlists just like Brené did. Or just find ways to be goofy and incorporate play into your day-to-day, like getting in and out of bed. Make sure you check out the full episode on the Unlocking Us podcast. It will definitely be worth your time. Speaking of play as an energy source, I'm super excited to introduce you to my guest on today's episode of The Recessed Life. His name is Stephen Jepson, and he is 80 years old. Yes, 80. And I can bet you he is the most energetic, bubbly 80-year-old you've ever heard. He is the creator of Never Leave the Playgroun, where he shares his philosophy of lifetime fitness and play. At 80 years old, he can ride a unicycle, juggle, walk a tightrope and loose rope, throw knives. And these are all things that he believes anyone can learn. He didn't even learn how to do a lot of these activities until he was in his 60s and 70s. On today's episode, we talk about why learning new physical activities is not only fun, but keeps you healthy and young at heart. Why it's specifically healthy and resilient for your brain and not just your body. We discuss how this practice saved him from a serious head injury he had a couple years ago. I'm using play to help heal, so this resonates with me even more now. This topic is super near and dear to my heart. One of my biggest pet peeves is hearing perfectly healthy people in their 30s talk about body aches and pains. We should definitely be conscious of our bodies, but we should not be less active as we grow up. Stephen is a beautiful example of how energetic you can be in old age if you never stop playing. Before the pandemic, Stephen spoke to audiences all over the country about his philosophy at Never Leave the Playgroun. He has videos you can purchase on his website. I'll be sure to post his website and other links to the show notes. Without further ado, enjoy this episode with Stephen Jepson from Never Leave the Playgroun.
Regarding my attitude about play, it's really a certain kind of activity that we did as children, and I don't even know if modern children are doing it so much. As I drive around or travel around, I don't see small groups of children on their bicycles or walking to the playground or going here or there together. And that was a very big thing for me as a child. And growing up in the 40s, we just got together in a gang of kids and did things together. And I don't know if modern children do that.
Yeah.
They're addicted to these. They're addicted to these machines and these things that people put in their laps and use, laptops and smartphones. Mm-hmm. Both of those things have been constructed to be as addictive as they can possibly make them.
Yeah, that's an interesting conversation in and of itself.
Right.
There is sort of a lack of I think what is called free play in children and in society now, where children are able to just freely play out in the open. There's a lot more vigilance and fear around safety and around kids not being responsible. And some of that may be true, but I think there's maybe a hypervigilance around it that is
I absolutely think there is.
Yeah.
I totally agree with you. I think, anyway, my attitude about play is the various ball games that we did, and marbles, and ring toss, and maypole dancing, and it's the physical activity. It's not the social. It's not. I'm not thinking about the social aspect of play. I'm only for people after they're 16, 20, 35, 65, 92, I'm thinking about what I do is I train people's hands and feet, right and left hand and right and left foot, to be quick and accurate all of their life, the way that we did as children. That was the main thing of children, was motor skill training. That was, for me, that was the most important thing, learning about it and how it is a supercharged way of enriching the brain. I am all about extra in the brain, supercharged ways of enriching the brain.
Let's get into it then. Let's start with you. Tell me how you landed on where you are now with Never Leave the Playgroun and what you teach today.
I read about 10 years ago the CDC figures on people over 65 falling. And if you fall over the age of 65, last year, these are approximate numbers, but last year approximately 2 million people over 65 fell down and went to the emergency room. Of those 2 million that went to the emergency room, 1 million were admitted to the hospital. And of those 1 million people, a certain percentage had fallen and broken their hip. If you fall and break a hip over the age of 65, 20% of that number is going to be dead in a year, and 80% of the remaining number is never going to live independently again. I thought, oh my God, I can help with that because I teach tightrope. I'll be 80 next year, by the way. I teach tightrope walking. I teach loose rope walking. I teach juggling. I learned to juggle clubs at age 74. And I teach knife throwing. I throw knives like the man in the circus. And just things like that.
You heard these stats, and it sounds like you just felt an urgency around spreading this message, around changing this statistic.
Yes, exactly. And I can change the statistic. And it's all very simple. It's just to stay active in certain ways that are proven to be healthy, period, by increasing someone's quickness and accuracy with both their right and left hand and their right and left foot. So if they're walking down the pavement and they're 48 or 52 or whatever age, and they catch a toe on a root or something on the sidewalk or a high place in the concrete, they can recover from it and not fall down. And if they fall down, if they're going to fall down, they fall down forward or backwards, so they don't break a hip if they possibly can. But if they're going down sideways, it's much better to break your wrist or your hand than it is to break a hip over 65.
Why do you think this starts to happen as folks grow older? Do you think it's something that we hear as a society and we think, oh, we're just supposed to move less, and so people accept that fact for themselves? Or how does that even happen?
No. That's fallacious. That's absolutely wrong. In other words, when I was 16 years old or in high school or just out of high school and in college, I thought I would grow old and I would be sitting on the front porch in a rocking chair watching the children play in the yard outside, and that is wrong. I better be out in the front yard rolling around and playing with the children, playing catch with balls or kicking balls or climbing on things, which I still do, and I'm almost 80. So it's a certain kind of physical activity that keeps us young. You can grow old in the years, but a person doesn't have to be old in how they feel and how they approach life. Mm-hmm. If I tell my audiences, if you're a good skier at a snow skier or even water skier, but a snow skier or a snowboarder at 30, and you want to still be doing that at 60, but you go and sit at a desk for 30 years or become quite sedentary and don't do it for 30, and then you go back out on the slopes and you have this memory of how you could do when you're 30, you're heading for an injury. In other words, if you want to keep horseback riding, doing anything, you better keep doing it all along, the whole thing. You cannot quit for long periods of time and then go back to it with the memory of how you could do when you were younger and think you're going to perform at that level without having done it the day before.
You just mentioned about the sedentary lifestyle that so many of us prescribe to. I live in San Francisco where people work long hours at times, and we're very much chained to our desks and chained to the idea that that is the way life is supposed to be. I personally work from home, so I'm able to move about during the day. But I think about some friends who their range of motion the whole day is they roll out of bed, they walk to their car or a car to go to work, sit down at their desk, and then they go back home. And that's their full range of motion the whole day. And what do you think is a way people can incorporate these ideas of keeping moving throughout their whole life when our world is so sedentary now?
It's a prescription for sickness and a long, slow slide to death. Sedentary behavior is so. Have you heard that sitting is the new tobacco?
I've heard that. I have. It's the new smoking. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the smoking is the new is like sitting. It causes people to grow fat, and it's just not healthy at all. It contributes to diabetes and heart problems and so forth. Just being sedentary, sitting on the couch, watching TV, or even sitting reading, or sitting looking at a computer. I've stood up almost all of my adult life. I'm standing up right now. I stand up and I move around because I think it is so key. I look in the mirror. I don't like to look in the mirror anymore. anymore, particularly because I see an older visage. And when I was young, I was, by some standards, I was not good looking, and now I look like an old man. But old men traditionally don't tightrope walk, which I can still do. Don't loose rope walk, which I can still do. Don't juggle. I don't think of what I do as exercise. I think of it as activity, because people, when you talk about exercise, they think of getting sweaty and doing something that they don't like to do particularly. They're doing it because it maintains a good heart and health and so forth, and it does, exercise. But activity, the kinds of activity that I do, are the playings, the games, and the toys that I use and have developed. People don't get sweaty doing it, but they're training their hands and feet. For instance, one of the things I do for my audiences is I pulled up a roll of masking tape, half-inch or inch masking tape. I say, go out in the garage and put down 20 feet of masking tape on the floor. I said, and walk on it. And you're tightrope walking. And you're focusing and you're paying attention, and now walk on that piece of tape sideways, and now walk on it backwards, and now hop along it. Now cover one eye and hop along it. That's another thing. I can take activities, I take them, and I can start everybody out so they can have success doing it, and then I can ratchet up the difficulty so much that almost no one can do it at first, but they can learn to do it. For instance, I have a board that's 10 inches wide, that's 2 feet long, and I put a book under one end, so I have a very low ramp. And I'm standing up, and I pick up a marble with 1 foot, and I drop it at the top of the ramp, and I quickly retrieve it before it rolls off the ramp at the bottom with my other foot. Then I drop that marble, the marble that's in that foot at the top, and I quickly pick it with my other foot, and I can do this over and over. But I can put a lot more than one book under it. I can make it a relatively steep ramp that almost no one could do it the first time, at least, and I can still do it. Anyway, it's just practice, and I start out real easy with things, and then I ratchet up the difficulty so that it constantly is training the body to be
I love
quick
that.
and accurate.
You mentioned you don't consider what you do exercise because you're not getting sweaty, and it's not about work so hard and get fit. And I think, unfortunately, in our culture, we've been taught to value only that kind of activity and movement. Only if you get fit and it's going to help you look better naked and all those things that we value from an image perspective. But it's harder to make a case sometimes around why what you're advocating for is important in the long run, in the long term of our lives. And I wish that we as a culture and society valued that more, because in the moment it might seem like, what good is it to pretend to walk on a tightrope? But for the long term of your life, it's important.
It teaches a lot of things. Well, I was just talking to a friend of mine back in the Midwest earlier today, and he said the most important thing that he's learned from me regarding a lot of different things is focus. He says, I never really thought about how important it was to focus on things, and then all the things that you do require focus. That's another thing. What I do keeps people in the moment of the day, because many of the things you can't be conjugating verbs or doing mathematical problems in your noggin when you're focusing on some of the various games, playings, and toys that I have. You have to focus on them, and so that causes you to be in the moment, so to speak. Would you like to hear how it kind of started as a child?
Absolutely. I was going to go back and say, I think someone would hear what you've shared so far and say, oh, this is not something I can learn because Stephen's special and he has...
I'm not.
Yes, exactly. So I would love for you to share why, yes, you are special, first of all, but why others can also learn this, and how this started for you, because everything has an origin story. We all start from somewhere. So where did you start this journey?
Well, when I was a child, 3 years old, I would extend my arms high above my head, and my father would grab me around the forearms and lift me up and put me in the sandbox. He had built a a fence around it so that the sandbox was totally enclosed, and it would be safe to put his 3-year-old son in this sandbox where my toys were, and it was a beautiful day in the Midwest, and it was wonderful. And they would come, my folks would go to the grocery store, go in the house, do whatever they're going to do, and they'd come back in 20 minutes or half an hour and expecting me to be there. And I would be gone. I would have figured out how to get out of. I was, from the moment I can remember anything, I was always curious, so curious about the world. What's beyond that doorway? What's beyond that turn in the road? What's beyond that bend in the river? What's over the hill? And then when I was 4, they put a little dog harness on me with a clip, with a loop in the back, and they could tether me to the clothesline, once again, thinking that they had come up with a way that would keep me safe and would keep me in the backyard, and they'd put me with my toys in the backyard, and I could play with them under the clothesline. Well, they'd come back in a half an hour, I'd be gone. So at 5 years old, my father gave me a wristwatch, and he said, this is the only rule that I had growing up, was I would be home at the dinner table at 6 p.m., period. There was no, and until I went away to college years later, that was the only rule, household rule that I had to obey that I can remember. And when I was 8 years old, in 1949, the circus came to town in Sioux City, and it came in, Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey came in on a train. All the train cars were filled with the various people and the things that a circus would need. Anyway, my father took me down and watched them, the circus people, set it up at beginning about 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning. He took me down, and we watched, and the last thing was they pulled up the big top. They used everybody in the circus, including the elephants, to pull up these huge canvas tents. Well, went home, and later that afternoon, 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, my mother and father took me down to the circus. And at 8 years old, I saw for the first time in my life that I can remember somebody juggling. And I thought to myself, well, I can do that, and I can, and I teach it now. And then a little bit later, I saw a guy come from behind a curtain on a unicycle. I'd never seen such a thing, and I thought, well, I can do that, and I can, and I teach it. And I went to, and then a little bit later out comes a guy named, with his name stenciled on his back, Rolando the Great or something like that, and he had tights on and a cape, and he comes out and he throws his cape off and he scampers up a little ladder, and he tightrope walks. And I said to him, I didn't say it out loud, but I thought to myself, I can do that, and I ended up teaching it. And then I went to a sideshow, and I saw a man throw knives at a target with a woman that could spin around. The target could spin, he could throw knives. And I thought to myself, well, I can do that. Well, I don't throw at a human being, but I can throw at a target with both my right and left hand releasing simultaneously with both hands. I've never even seen anybody do this, and the knives will come together something the size of a dime at about 12 feet. I can throw with both my right and left hand. My wife bought me a unicycle for my 30th birthday. It took me 20 minutes to learn to ride it.
20 minutes?
Yeah. Now, okay, that's another thing. There's 2 things about a unicycle that's different from any previous human experience for almost all of us, and that is to mount the thing, to get up on and start riding a unicycle is a difficult thing to do, sort of, kind of. And then once you get up, riding it is a second kind of difficult thing that none of us have any particular memory for. So at 30, we were on not an abandoned, but a no longer used dairy farm, and it had a walkway down the center of the barn that was concrete with a wall on both sides, and it was about 4 feet wide, this long walk with a wall on both sides, 4 feet wide. I got put gloves on, and so I could get up on this unicycle, and I learned to ride it before I learned to mount it, so that I was pretty good at riding it, but I didn't learn to mount it, so that when I was going to come to learn to mount it, I had something to do when I mounted it successfully. In other words, most people get up on a unicycle and they go over. They get up on it and they go over. Well, I got up on it, and I only practiced 2 minutes a day. In other words, I took it about 2 weeks to learn to do it, but only about two minutes a day. Short, intense. Anyway, that's how I learned to ride. I learned to ride it, and then I learned to mount it because it was much. That's another thing. I take very difficult things for people to learn to do. Throwing pottery on a potter's wheel. You know what that is?
Yeah. Yep. I did that in middle school. I haven't since, but I did.
Oh, you're right. Right. Well, I am as good as anybody I know at teaching people to do that because I don't, first of all, I don't create anxiety in anyone by telling them the clay has to be centered to make pottery because that's not true. It doesn't have to be centered. It can be a little bit off because people can always put their hands on something and always look at it and see that it's a little bit off. So something called centering anxiety is created in people because they can make things, but they can't get it this perfect centering every single time. Anyway,
I think anxiety in general is why a lot of people don't end up trying things and feeling like they need to be perfect. And so I love that you just said that you help get rid of that from the beginning, because I think that's why a lot of us don't even start something.
Right. I totally agree with that. I totally, and so I try to make all the various physical things that I do that are relatively difficult for people to do. Oh, that's another thing. When I get up on stage in front of an audience, I don't say, oh, we're all going to learn to tightrope today, we're all going to learn to juggle today. And I do not do that. I say we're all going to, sitting down, we're going to learn to pick up marbles with our toes and drop them in a bowl. Those are the kind of things that I start with, and then I just... I ratchet up the difficulty, but start easy and have fun. Keep it fun, and then don't practice till you're making mistakes. Just practice a few minutes. Anything you want to do. The first 500 times that you do something new that you've never done before are the times that the brain has changed the most. For instance, if you're going to learn to ice skate or rollerblade or whatever, if you've never done it before and you do it the first day, it's the amount that you know to go from zero to anything is it's tremendous. It's a big number that now you know what it feels like to do this, and then by practicing it a little bit each day or on a regular basis, you get better at it. But it's the first 500 times you practice something that the biggest changes ensue. Big changes happen early on, and then the changes get incrementally smaller as the time passes.
Sure. The biggest amount of changes happen when you're in that beginning. Yeah.
Exactly.
We hate feeling like we are not good enough at something and that we're not perfect. And again, I think that's why we end up not starting something or trying something. But I mean, you're saying that being a beginner is actually going to improve your brain, it's going to change your health. And so constantly always be a beginner and make it fun.
Cognitive reserve. That's what's happening. Do you know what a one wheel is? ONEWHEL, one wheel. Anyway, it's a board with a great big wheel in the center, electric, and people ride on these. They stand. It looks like you're floating along.
Yes, I have seen it. Yep.
Okay. Well, I got one January of 2018.
2 years ago when you were 77, right?
Yeah. And I got one, and I learned to ride it really, really well. Well, the first day of 2019, the year that has just passed, the first day I was out in Florida on a asphalt back road here, a safe place to be. I just finished a wonderful ride and I took it up to full speed, and I looked back and there was an automobile behind me. And it turned out it was a sheriff's car, and he's on the horn saying, oh, my God, this guy's really, really good on this thing. And my God, he's going 20 miles an hour. Anyway, I don't know what happened, but my head hit the ground unprotected at 20 miles an hour, and I was in a coma for 3 days. And,
oh, my goodness.
I had a big, huge, I broke my skull bad enough to let gas in from the outside, and there was a big blood bleed inside my head above my left eye. And the pictures they were taking, which every few hours they thought they were going to have to take me away to another hospital or someplace else to drill my head and let the pressure off. But and I saw the pictures later that it had dramatically pushed my brain over to the right side of my head, this bleed inside my head. It was in the emergency room for 3 days and then a few more days in the hospital. And then I went home and they said, this man cannot be left alone because he's going to have, potentially, going to have a seizure and it's going to be bad. Anyway, I never did, and I wasn't left alone at first. And 30 days later, still in the month of January 2019, I went back. They took another picture of my head. 5 days later, 4 days later, I went back to the doctor. He said, I don't know what it is. This is a brain surgeon. He says, I don't know what it is about you. He says, it must be, he didn't know about my training, but he says, you're well. You're dismissed. You're going home. I was going home, but yeah, and so I think, and my gal, who's a high-end oncology nurse, she thinks it's because of all this stuff I do that I do have redundancy in my brain. I do have extra up there to compensate because I came back at the end of a month after this very serious injury with nothing wrong. I hadn't lost one iota of things I could do. I could still do all the stuff, and
oh my goodness.
Anyway, that's it. So what I do, I have personal experience with what I do has caused a recovery in me that people thought I was going to die.
What you do creates resilience so that you are able to come back.
Did you read in the Washington Post that article? In fact, the doctor is from San Francisco. Anyway, she wrote about me a little bit about me in Washington Post.
Oh, I'll have to look that up.
If you're curious about it, you can Google Stephen Jepson, and it's a fairly recent mention that she talks about me. And so
I would love to read that. Yeah. How did you start teaching? Because it sounds like you started learning these and practicing on your own, but then you started to teach others. How did that start?
I was a potter. I have an MFA in ceramics and ceramic design and that sort of thing. And I went to a place called Alfred, which is not a place you've ever even heard of, but it was a pottery school. And I learned to be a potter, and I was good at it, and I was a natural. I got a job teaching pottery, but that all happened because I grew up thinking I was a dummy. I was clever, and I was given credit for being clever. When I was a little tiny kid, my father, an attorney, I was the firstborn boy, and he would teach me when I was 3 years old. He would teach me the alphabet, something that was totally abstract, not related to anything, my toys or anything that I already knew about. The ABCs, the 1, 2, 3s, 2 plus 2 equals 4, that sort of thing. He taught this young little boy to do those things, and I could do just fine when he was there with me. And 3 hours later, he would ask me a question about what he had taught me earlier, and I could not retrieve it. I couldn't bring it back. And because of his training of cross-examining people and so forth, he thought he could, by doing that sort of thing, get the answer. And I ended up becoming hysterical. Well, I pissed in my pants, and I was a young boy. I didn't wear diapers anymore, but that's how anxious. So I grew up thinking there was something not quite. I did 4 hours of homework in 4 years of high school. If I couldn't get it done in study hall, I didn't do it. And so I never faced head on anything. I think right now, today, there's nothing I couldn't learn to do. If somebody can teach it or somebody can share it with me, I can learn to do it. But when I was young, you have to do things right with children, and that wasn't done quite right with me. My sister saved my life.
Oh.
The fact that she was born and it took the heat off me. In other words, there was a reason why this little kid was going to escape from the sandbox and being tethered to the clothesline, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. It was that the world was so interesting, and I just I could go off and be by myself with my thoughts and finding out what was behind every door and every place I was curious about.
And to your point with that story, I think a lot of us as children felt like you did, because when we are children, we are curious, we are imaginative, we are playful, and we do get excited about things like the circus or, whatever it is that compels us.
My mother was, in all the world, one of the brightest minds on creativity. And she wrote her doctoral thesis on evoking creativity from adults and children in a classroom setting. And when I was 8 years old, I'm going to hold the phone away from my head. Mm-hmm. I said to my mom, "Hey, Mom, there's nothing to do." Could you hear that?
I did, yes.
And my mother said, "Son, your bed needs making, the lawn needs mowing, and the trash needs carrying out." I never asked another person again in my life to come up with something for me to do. I was 8 years old at the time. So
that stuck with you, huh?
Yeah, so she was extremely creative. My mother was this astoundingly beautiful woman, but she never used her beauty to get anything from anyone. She was very, very smart, and she was my coach, high school coach, and a little bit in swimming, and was a model for me too in later life. She was an artist and quite wonderful.
Oh, it sounds like you got a lot of your creative spirit from her.
She was very gentle. She called my dad off me. She said, "Leave that boy alone." I mean, I don't remember that, but it must have happened.
Oh, so it sounds like your mom really nurtured your creative spirit, and perhaps
she did.
You didn't. You felt differently with your father. Your father had a different approach with you. Really.
Well, he didn't know. He didn't.
Right.
He didn't. He would teach me something, and then ask me about it later, expecting me to know. With his questioning, make a little child hysterical. He didn't understand why I wouldn't know 2 + 2 = 4, or whatever it was that he was teaching. And if he'd have come about it maybe a little more gently, I probably would have done better at it. But he just didn't know, and he was doing the best.
He was doing the best with what he knew.
Exactly. That's exactly right, Louise.
Yeah. And I think back to my point around how we all can relate to you as a child, because we all have that imagination and that creative spirit in us. And for a lot of us, unfortunately, whether that's through school or from outside pressures or society, that gets squeezed out of us as we grow older and we decide we need to be some version of ourselves that the world will accept, and that might include getting rid of that creative spirit. But for you, what makes you so special is that you held on to that through your childhood, even though it sounds like you had your challenges with your father. For those people out there that maybe feel like they are not specifically playful, or that they don't have the natural innate skills or talents that you have, what would you say to them around maintaining a playful mindset and movement practice in their life?
I would say anything that anybody wants to do that is physical. Jacks, for instance, that's a little girl's game, jacks, with a ball and little metal pieces. Well, boys didn't do jacks, but as a 70-year-old or 60-year-old, I learned to do jacks with my left hand. I can do them with my right hand. I learned to do my left. That's another thing. Everything that a person learns to do, learn to do it with both hands, both feet. I tell my audiences 2, 3 things that you can do immediately. They're going to add to the quality of your life, the length of your life, your happiness, are practice balancing on one foot and have a stand-up desk and begin to use your non-dominant hand. These are 3 separate things. Your non-dominant hand. I stand in the kitchen every morning of my life on one foot. I stir with my non-dominant hand, and I'm pouring boiling water into the pot with my right hand, and that's what I do. And just because I stand there doing that, standing on one foot, stirring this old guy.
I love it.
And I can do it, and I can do it pretty well. But when I first started, it's much easier to stir with your dominant hand, and we've been doing it for all these years. And anyway.
And those are simple things you can do every day, anywhere.
You're right. Chopsticks. Learn to do. If you can't use chopsticks at all, learn to do them with your right. But then learn to do them with your left too. I can pick up marbles with my non-dominant hand with chopsticks.
Oh wow! Slippery marbles?
No, that's very kind of you. You can use chopsticks. I just have a feeling you can use chopsticks beautifully, and it's not as difficult as it sounds. But
not with my left hand, though. I would say.
Well, yeah. But a little practice, and you'll be able to. But it causes big changes in your brain when you're first starting to do it, and that's what's important to me.
What kind of skills are you working on right now? What are you leveling up towards that you can share with us?
I would like to learn to fly a kite and use a board in the ocean or in the big lake. Sailboarding. You've seen people do it. Have you seen that guy that takes off from the second story of a building? He's in the room, and he goes, and his kite he's going to fly is flying outside. He's got a hold of the controls of the kite. He steps through the doorway, up onto the railing, and jumps off the railing, and now he's 2 stories above the ground. He sails to the ground. He picks up the water 6 inches from the shore and goes off on this handsome young kid. Have you seen that?
I haven't. I have to look that up. Is it on
It's
YouTube?
just wondrous. It is just a wondrous thing to observe. Anyway, but I want to do that. I just want to learn to do it on the fly a kite and have it pull me on through the water.
I think you're going to do it. I have a hunch. What is your day-to-day like in terms of your daily routine, and what does a typical day look like in terms of how you play and move? I'm just so curious to get a big picture of what Stephen's life looks like.
Right. Well, I could walk away. I don't want to walk out of the range of this phone. So but I've got pieces of PVC, all different diameters. Some of them up to 6-inch diameter, and I've got they're black around one end. I'm just looking at one right now, and it is approximately 16 inches long. It's about 1.25 inches, but I've got them down to very, very small, short and small, and they're black around one end. So I throw it up in the air, and I do the half turn. It's just real easy. You could do it with a wooden spoon in the kitchen, I tell people. And I do a half turn, and I'm just doing it right now. And then I do the 360, and I can do that with both hands, and things like that. I've got a target that, in fact, I have several of them that I can throw balls to that the ball bounces off the target. I have a couple different balls, and I catch, and I throw with my right hand, catch with my right. I throw with my right, catch with my left. I throw with my left, catch with my right, and I do that to 10 different things over and over. Throw with my right, catch with my right, throw with my right, catch with my right. I do that all 10 times. And at the very end, I put 2 balls in one hand, I throw them to the target, and I can catch both those balls coming off the target. But I read a lot. Have you read The Social Leap by William von Hippel?
No, I'm going to have to make a whole list of all these things you're talking about. I have not read that one.
I'm telling you, you're going to read that book, and you're going to say, I'm going to have credibility with you, Louise. Have you read Zucked, Z-U-C-K-E-D?
No, I have not.
It's written by a guy from out in your area who was first of all, it's a takeoff on Zuckerberg. And you can imagine what other word that it rhymes with, zucked, that what this author thinks Facebook has done to the world. 2 billion. Anyway, I highly recommend it. The Zucked and The Social Leap. I read extensively, and I'm almost always reading, almost every day. Well, my smartphone is out in my vehicle, and I charge it about once a year.
Really?
Yeah.
Do you use a landline telephone or just a normal cell phone?
Yeah, I do. That's what I'm on with you now. It's not my smartphone. And anyway, the service isn't very good here on the smartphone, but it's wonderful on the landline.
Yeah.
I just think that in one of the books I read, when you're driving down the highway and you look at a billboard, and you see a Chevrolet or a Coppertone tanning or advertising Tide or just something on a billboard, the billboard isn't looking back at you. When you watch TV and it was Gunsmoke or just any of the various programs we watch, Ernie Kovacs, just the things that I watched when I was a kid, the TV wasn't looking back at me. But when you open that laptop, when we open a laptop, that laptop instantly knows where you are, who you are, 57 different things about you instantly, and then when you start to use it, the thing could go. That's why when you're on a computer and all of a sudden there's a little ad for something that BMW, maybe you research automobiles or whatever, a little ad comes up. Well, how did it know that?
Sure. Of course, because it tracks you. Yeah.
Exactly.
And I think inherently it's not all bad, because if it wasn't for the internet, I wouldn't have been able to find you. And that's how I first learned about Charlie, the person who told me about you. And I'm so glad that the internet allows us to be able to reach others. But how do we incorporate it into our life in a healthy way and use it in a productive,
it's a mystery way. It's a conundrum. It's a problem.
It is, because the internet's not going away, though, and we have to figure out a way to make it work sustainably.
But can I read you something that I wrote that it completely encapsulates my mindset on this movement thing.
Sure.
This is what I believe to be true and my reaction to it. As hunter-gatherers, scavengers for most of the last 2.5 million years, our main goal from the day of our birth was to gain the skills necessary to survive to sexual maturity so that we could cast our genetic material into the future. Each of us was self-reliant and capable of myriad things, from making our own clothing to getting enough to eat. We made constant use of our survival skills. We used our survival skills all of our lives. Modern humans seem to have some kind of memory for this flurry of ancient motor skill training because of the behavior that modern children exhibit today. Jump rope, hopscotch, jacks, ball games, monkey bars, bicycling, ring toss, swimming, dancing, skateboarding, skiing, horseback riding, and on and on. Our bodies yearned for these various activities, and we do it for years, and then we quit and become sedentary, a recipe for illness. I teach people to keep up the physical movement, the activity which continually enriches the brain and body. My games, playings, and toys do that, continually honing physical skills while learning new ones. My program improves one's balance, stability, and coordination with attendant improvement in one's memory, creativity, mood, and more. Keep moving in fun, creative ways all of your life.
Yes, I love that so much. And yes, going back to how when we were all young, we have this innate in us. It comes so naturally.
It's in our genes almost.
It comes so naturally. And then we grow up, and I'm in my 30s. I'll be 35 in 6 months. And I have friends that will say, "Oh, Louise, that's just who you are. You were always born this way. And you've always been energetic and playful and active." And I say, no, you were too, because this was all of us. And I've actually I've almost fallen, I've almost succumbed to the idea that I need to be sedentary and to be serious and to stop all of that. But I've had to actively work to get back to that inner child person I was when I was growing up. And it's in all of us. And we just have to be able to access that again and to find it again. And it hasn't gone away. And you're such a living proof of that, Stephen, because you are a living example of that, and you're almost 80, and I just love that's what you're sharing.
Yes, and it can be something as simple as, if a person's never eaten with chopsticks, to learn to eat with chopsticks. I'm telling you, it's supercharged in the way it's going to enrich the brain, and then begin to do it with your left hand, and that'll make a person unusual. In other words, learning to do it with the dominant hand, that's fine. But when you learn to do it with your non-dominant hand, and painting with a paintbrush, or sanding furniture, or just use your non-dominant hand, and that is going to enrich your brain because it's new to your brain.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, and I think that's such a good that's a very also sustainable way to incorporate this, because we do live in a society, and for better or worse, where it's not built into our environment to play on very easily sometimes, because a lot of people are stuck in their offices, and the only movement they think about is to go to the gym so that they can look better naked. And that's their only motivation.
I make a game out of almost everything. Mm-hmm. Tossing a pencil into a glass. Everything. I can make a game. I can make almost anything into a little game or something to have fun with. Yeah. And that seems like playing to me.
Yeah, and it's available to us if we really look for it, but we have to be aware that this is something that, first of all, that is important.
It's important.
It's important.
It's important. That's what you're saying, that it's important.
Are you looking for more play in your life? Make sure you're subscribed to the Recess Life podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or any of the podcast platforms. You can also find the video interviews on YouTube. Don't forget to leave a review. Your feedback is so important to me, and it helps others to find the podcast. You can also follow the conversation on Instagram at The Recess Life. And lastly, you can go to therecesslife.com, where you'll find all the episodes and show notes on each of our guests. I hope this podcast helps you to become a little more playful today than you were yesterday. Until next time, don't forget to get out and play today.